Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Peter Downs. Welcome to the first of the post-COVID-19 community sports forums. The aim of these forums is pretty straightforward. It's to give you some food for thought and some ideas about the impact of community sport now and in the future. I first like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we all sit, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. Now the format is pretty straightforward as well. It's we've got two speakers today. We have Dr Bridie O'Donnell and Paul Kennedy. Some of you may have seen about 3 or 4 weeks ago an Offsiders edition on the ABC, what discussed the impact of COVID-19 on community sport, and Bridie and Paul featured on that episode. And what better way to kickstart this series than to continue that discussion here with a focus on one of the themes that came out of that episode around community connections. Now we would do like to, I can see the questions coming in, and we would like to get your questions. You can do that in a couple of ways. You can go into the YouTube and post some questions there. You can also go to Slido as well. So if you go to slido.com, you don't need to log in or anything. You can just put in the code 18544 and you'll be able to ask questions via Slido as well. So I can see questions coming in already, which is great. So thanks very much for that. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr Bridie O'Donnell, who is Director of the Office for Women in Sport and Recreation, and a great champion of inclusion and diversity generally. And like I said, Bridie was part of that discussion on Offsiders a few weeks ago, so I thought it'd be great to get her back to continue that discussion. Welcome, Bridie.
Thanks, Peter. Great to be here.
It's good. We can hear you and see you loud and clear, which is good. So, Bridie, let's just kick start and that discussion. How important, what are some of the challenges now facing community sport, and what do you see as the importance of community connections as we move forward?
Thank you for asking me to be involved. I thought I'd just start by giving a little bit of context about how I've been connected to community sport for the last 4 decades. I grew up in regional Queensland, and I've been a club member of a variety of different sports as a kid, as an adolescent, and as an adult. I've competed in gymnastics, netball, touch football, triathlon, rowing and cycling. And what that's meant is I've seen as a kid, as a participant, and witnessed parents and volunteers, and then been a competitor and seen the impact that being engaged in sport has had not only on my life but on teammates and on people in various communities. I also completed med school in Queensland, and you do a lot of regional and rural work when you work as a junior doctor. And to work in places like Palm Island, where my dad was a teacher, a remote Aboriginal community off the coast of Townsville, or Mount Isa, where the majority of the workforce are men, and they're miners or nurses and police, and there's not a lot else to do. It's such an extraordinary visual reminder of how much community sport unites people, how it provides them with something to do, with a sense of belonging. It introduces them to people when they're new to town, and then in metro cities across Australia, we know it also creates spaces for people who haven't been included perhaps in more traditional sports. And we know that there are more choices, more options in bigger cities where there are more populations. But we also know Australia's got a real reputation for being a sporting country and an active country, and if you like, probably a bit mythologically, a bronzed Aussie, fit and healthy. But in fact, what we're seeing from a lot of Ausplay data and Sport Australia data is that we're not as fit and healthy as we would like to be, or that we could or should be for health, mental and physical health benefits. And the other thing that's been really prominent in my mind in the last 2.5 years in this job is just how many people are underpaid or unpaid in sport and active recreation who work in it. just the tens of thousands of volunteers across this country that actually keep sport and rec going. They are often parents or passionate people, former players. They're the administrators that are actually just running a committee from their kitchen table. And so a lot of people, understandably, were pre-corona focused on what was right in front of them, which is next week's fixture, managing issues, where does revenue come from, will we keep that sponsor? And there hasn't always been an opportunity in community sport to forecast. And we know that bankers and doctors and lawyers are often really good at doing pre-mortems, which is basically let's work out what could go wrong and what could be the worst thing that happens. And yet I think it's fair to say that no one imagined that all of sport would get shut down. We're now approaching the end of 2 months. So I think the first thing I wanted to remind everyone is that this has been shocking in the true sense of the word, that people have probably got a bit of psychological whiplash. They've probably got a bit of, they're grieving the loss of their work or their role in society, their status as a committee leader or a board member or a CEO. They're managing a whole lot of personal issues, both the working from home and the staff and their kids. And then they're forecasting the fear of loss of revenue or what this means for them. And so the conversations that colleagues of mine and I have been having with sporting organisations and people who work in clubs is how hard it's been. And I think the other important part of this is that closing the doors wasn't easy, but it was simple. And shutting things down wasn't easy to do, but it was actually kind of a simple way in which to manage a potential health crisis. But now we're in this opening of the doors sort of phase, and that's going to be way more complex than we imagined. There's going to be multiple layers of engagement required between local councils, schools, parents, sporting organisations, peak bodies, politicians, like we've never seen before and like we've never required before. And that actually is both the hardest and the most exciting part, because we've already seen in the state I'm in, Victoria, an unprecedented level of communication and collaboration between CEOs of different sports, big and large, between various politicians and budget processes, between colleagues in different parts of department, and just broadly, people probably making more of an effort to ask each other how they're doing. And we've never needed to do that before, and yet this has sort of forced our hand, so the crisis has been helpful in that regard. And I think finally my focus now, and this is something I talked about on Offsiders a few weeks ago, was what is the opportunity now for us to do things differently in a positive way? So not bouncing back to the way things always were, but could we bounce forward into a much more innovative and inclusive way to deliver sport and recreation? And for some people, that's never been an issue. Some sports are really great at that, of considering everyone, all genders, all abilities, all backgrounds. But in other ways, sometimes people have just been doing the same thing they've always been doing for 100 years. And now is the chance to make sure, firstly, that your doors are open to all people in Australia from all backgrounds. And particularly around where we see socioeconomic disadvantage, because this is going to be the biggest challenge for families and people who are low on money, is how do they get back into sporting communities and afford the things they do and stay engaged as best they can. But we also know that historically sport has been delivered probably for a more narrow cohort of sort of sub-elite, generally men's teams of more traditional codes. And the explosion that we've seen of professional women's sport and the engagement of girls in non-traditional sports like Aussie rules, basketball, cricket particularly, and then more niche offerings that have really allowed women and girls to participate in ways they haven't before. These are the opportunities that we want sport to maintain momentum. We want them to innovate and we want them to collaborate. So as hard as this has been for everyone, I'm actually kind of excited to ask ourselves as a sector, what can we do better? What things do we need to not do anymore? What new ways can we bring in revenue? What new ways can we collaborate? So I'm very keen to hear people's questions, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Paul has to say.
Fantastic. The questions have been streaming in. It's a bit hard for me to keep up with them at at the moment, Bridie. But I'll try and bring one or two in. I was very interested myself, and there's kind of a theme going through the questions too, around opportunities that come. It seems strange to talk about a pandemic and then opportunities that come out of it, but I think you're right, and people are saying there are maybe some opportunities there. So let's see if I can bring up a couple of the questions on the screen or comments on the screen. This is from Maya. Hi, Maya. Looking forward to it. Interested to know in how we make sure underrepresented groups don't get left further behind after all this, and how all sport can be more inclusive for everyone from this point on.
So I think what helps, and when we talk about opportunities post-pandemic, is, for example, we know we're going to be hearing from the Prime Minister later about a potential easing of restrictions, and then most states and territories are going to hear from their Premier or Chief Minister about what each of those jurisdictions are going to do in the coming weeks. So if you think about a particular sport or recreation activity that might normally be delivered in a certain way, and that's been bringing in their money in the families, if they have to modify that, if they have to think, okay, we can't have as many people playing that thing indoor, or we have to do it outside, maybe that actually gives you an opportunity to widely broadcast that to your community and say, hey, I know we can't do wheelchair basketball in this indoor court with the same number of people, but is there a way we can still provide an activity for kids in wheelchairs who were normally engaged in wheelchair basketball, but that we still want to remain engaged with our club and with activity? Yeah. Or have Aboriginal kids in regional parts of the country or rural parts of the country had barriers around cost, transport, geography, or even cultural problems of racism within community clubs. Clubs are needing to be much more mindful about how they invite, include and retain people, how they manage issues, manage complaints, manage broader policies around inclusion, and start to model on best case scenarios. So when I talked earlier about communication, what we've been having a few times a week in Victoria is conversations with CEOs on what their problems are, but also what some of their solutions are. And Vic Sport is sharing what those solutions are, sharing how they're engaging with high performance athletes to inspire younger beginners who are at home. So that's never happened before. And if you've got a small sporting organisation or a small club, having regular contact with another club says, hey, we tried this. We had our under 16 men's footy team, and they're now training with the girls, and they're sharing skill sessions together because everyone's spread out anyway, and we can't perform the drills in the same way. So we're all doing stuff together, and the coaches are learning off each other. So that becomes then professional development for some of the coaches who are less experienced to learn from probably the more experienced coaches. So everyone's having to reshape their return to play in a way that's code specific or activity specific based on guidelines that are health related. So everyone's being forced to be innovative, and those that aren't will actually get left behind.
Yeah, that's very true, isn't it? Yes. One more, right, on a theme, and there is a theme. I've been monitoring it as you were talking there. I guess kind of similar question from Lee Wilson from Netball in Queensland. There is a significant risk disadvantaged groups will become worse off after COVID-19, as sport organisations will have limited resources to commit to inclusion. How do we ensure, I guess it's the same sort of question, really. There is a theme going through that there's a real concern that some of the work being done over the past few years, in particular around inclusion and diversity, could drop off, particularly because of the financial restrictions.
Well, firstly, I've never run a sporting organisation, and I know how hard it is and how tight money can be. But I do sometimes find myself frustrated that diversity inclusion officers or little projects to focus on inclusion are a side business, a side hustle, a nice to have, when I want them to be business as usual. In the same way that organisations' big business is starting to have diversity inclusion as a board agenda item every single meeting, and people and culture as a board agenda item. It shouldn't be the last thing you discuss. And have an inclusion officer or get a project funding for that specifically. What we would encourage a lot of sporting organisations to do is think, how can we be doing that all the time anyway? How can we be asking ourselves the question, if we had a kid who identifies as non-binary, does that kid have an opportunity to walk into our club and just say, hey, I really want to play? It's a really good way to check your own privilege. If sport is generally delivered for you, and you never have to ask any questions about things being modified for you or asking permission to do things differently, then you're privileged. I'm absolutely privileged. I'm white, I'm well educated. I grew up with parents who loved me. They provided a roof for me and they said, just try your best. Not everyone has had that kind of opportunity or start in life, and I acknowledge that. So if you think that sport is easy and you've never had a problem with racism or sexism or homophobia or, persecution of people with disability, maybe you're not one of those groups, and maybe you need to hear from the voices of those people in your community and say, hey, what would it take for us to deliver a program that ensures that kids with disability or autism are able to come in and play netball here, or that people from the CALD community whose English is their second language, what do they need? What do they want to deliver sport that might be safe and active for members of their community that also aligns with their faith or their religion?
Fantastic. Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Bridie. There is a ton of questions, but I think we'll move on. Please keep sending them in, everybody, and thank you very much. It really does help us frame future forums too, to be able to see what some of the issues you're raising are. Thank you, Bridie. I'll switch over to Paul now. Hopefully I can do that. Well, I have. There you go. Hello, Paul. How are you?
Good, thanks, Peter.
Great. Now, Paul, Paul Kelly, obviously through ABC sports journalist there. We see him in the every morning. Well, I do anyway. And a great champion and heavily involved in community sport, and a great champion of community sport issues as well. So I'll pose you the same question, Paul. What are some of the challenges now, and particularly in terms of the importance of community connections, what are those you see going forward?
Thanks, Peter. So I'll ramble on now as I do, but on this topic I can get carried away. So I'll rely on you to look at the clock for me, mate, and wrap me up when you want. But I am very much like Bridie, looking forward to sports seizing the opportunities that have presented themselves while someone hit the big pause button. Just some background too for those people that might just have seen me on the news and wonder what my connection to sport is. I've played sport all my life. I've coached for about 16 years. I started coaching when I was about 26. I was a playing coach at a football club on the Mornington Peninsula, and then fell in love with coaching. And so I've been involved behind the scenes as a coach or a player for a long, long time. At the moment, my two teams that I coach, the under-14s at Carrum down in Frankston in Victoria, and so one of my sons is in that, and I coach a school team as well in the school competition in Melbourne, Mentone Grammar. Not involved with the school, but as a coach. I also have, which is a much bigger job, 3 sons, and they're aged 14, 12 and 7, and the indoctrination program we've got at the Kennedy household is going very well. They're all mad for sport. Which means we're very busy. The kids play football, cricket, basketball. They do athletics, and I've got a strong interest also in netball through my wife, who played netball for a long time. So that's the background. What I would say the big problems have been for me and people I know in the community in the outer suburbs, mainly the mental health of our children and how they've been coping without their games to go to. And all 3 of my sons have reacted differently. My 12-year-old son particularly loves competition, and at times I've been a bit worried about him. They're all keeping active, so we've prioritised finding ways for them to remain physically fit, and we've had some fun with that, sourcing different workouts and just trying to keep fit and active, and which I know makes them feel calmer as well. Because if they don't do it, I notice that they can, go into themselves a little bit and sit and just stew over what they can't do. So that's been one thing that we've been able to do in the last few weeks. With their sporting teams, the local rugby club, which one of them plays rugby, they've been particularly good at sending out communications for kids to do challenges. So the kids will, a little thing which I thought was great, which occupied us for at least a week and a half, was the kids in the rugby team would write out their names, and then they'd have a little workout for each letter of their name, and that'd be their workout, and they'd post that and they'd share it with each other. So that was great. And that same rugby club, Southern Districts in Victoria, has also been really good in posting really regular updates on the advice given from governments on where are we, because one of the big question is, are we going to get to play any games this year? So that's been good. It's only a little thing, but those little updates, okay, I talk with my boys, this is what's happening. We may not play this year. If we don't, there's bigger problems in the world, so that's okay. But there's a chance, and this is what we're doing. With my other teams, the under-14s and my school team, I've taken to having Zoom meetings. I don't know about everyone, but I'd never heard of Zoom about 6 weeks ago. And all of a sudden I'm having Zoom meetings, and having Zoom meetings with boys of the age of sort of 17, 18, the school team is very interesting because they don't say much to you. But the feedback is when you have a chat to them about what they can be doing, give them some tips on strength and conditioning, some running things to do. I send out regular running programs, understanding that not all of them are going to do those things, some skill drills, and I've also been offering some advice on reading, and at least one of them has shown interest in that. So that was good. And the feedback is later on that they love the Zoom meetings, even though I wasn't getting much from them online, but that's just the way they are. So the under-14s, I did the same with that, and I wasn't sure how many would tune in, but they jumped on in there and we had a chat, and we're very much looking forward to next week. I think it's going to be a big breakthrough if they do relax the restrictions and have groups of 10, because already I've organised, whether we play games or not, to have that meeting and have find an innovative way of social distancing and having training. So that's another thing. The other thing that I'd like to touch on with Community Connections is I'm very interested in how clubs can thrive in the next 12 months. And I think there's a great opportunity there for clubs. The big challenges for clubs, and I'm sure everyone's worrying about the same thing, is time and money. Money is a big worry for particularly my local football club, which I still take a keen interest in. They're worrying at the moment about whether they come back to play, whether or not they're going to have player payments for the men's team. And I would say absolutely no. Forget about it. Take the stress off yourself and start to reshape the way you run your club. Take player payments out this year and then really cut the hell out of them next year, and take control as a volunteer of the way that your club is spending money, because you haven't got any revenue. The other thing is a little might seem like a little thing, but the cost of tape and training and all of that equipment. Well, my wife played netball for many years, and before she went to the game, she taped her own ankles and bought her own tape. Yet the footballers expect to turn up and get taped, and I don't know where they think all of that money's coming from. So a little thing for our local club is to cut the player payments for the men. The women don't get paid anyway. They play for fun. So what's the difference? And also, bring your own tape. So that's a little thing there. The other thing I would say is an opportunity to really make a strong connection with your sponsors. You shouldn't worry about whether sponsors or not are going to kick in money next year or not, or this year, for instance. Your real focus now should be on making sure that your sponsors know that you're there for them. So if there's a pizza shop around the corner that kicks in a little bit of money every year, make sure that all of your members at the moment are told when and where they can go and buy their pizzas once a week. We're not advocating pizza every day of the week, but go and if you're going to go and get some takeaway food, go to this place because they've got hand sanitizer, they're socially distancing, it's safe. Go and support our sponsor because we love them, and I think you're going to feel that love come back to you. You can do the same thing with the local mechanic or so on and so on. Think about your sponsors and how you can get around them at this time, and forget about whether or not they're going to pledge money next year. Understand that if you look after them now, you're building that loyalty and connection, and loyalty is a big thing. Constantly we're told that there's no loyalty in sport. There is at community level, and so I could go on about that, but I'm conscious of time, and I would just say that as an organisation, you need to, as a volunteer, you're in charge. So I really reckon that we need to take back control of our sports as volunteers and stop looking to the big end of town to take control of the sport. Just this morning, I saw an ad go out for junior players 9 to 15, and I won't say that the club, but it's an AFL club that's running these programs for the kids is $240 over 6 weeks. That really annoys me. But really, I mean, they can do what they like. They want to continue running these programs and charging families, which I think feeds into what Bridie was talking about before. That's going to be exclusionary because some people can't pay their money. As a club, I would advocate finding and getting as much resources as you can and put them on your Facebook site or your website or YouTube, and put out programs, training programs, diet programs, anything you can, and give it out for free. And that will be gold for people out there who aren't like me and don't spend their whole time looking at fitness and games. A lot of parents have no idea. But if you're providing that for them now, how to keep their kids fit and how to keep them active, how to keep their skills up, and that's gold. And they don't have to go and pay their $200 for this online program, which will be no better than what you can provide as a club and as an association. So I think those are the things that you can overcome. You can make it free for people to learn how to play sport. You can build that goodwill online. You've got to assist your coaches. Not all coaches are switched on enough to do Zoom meetings. Let them know that it's, that's going to be valuable for them to see the coach looking at the player and talking to that player. That's going to keep that player coming back because that's what players, whether they can verbalise it or not, they love that connection with their coaches. And the other thing is time. I reckon the skills that we built up through this period of pause are going to be gold for clubs. You're worried about volunteers. I know you are all worried about whether or not volunteers are going to come back and help out. Make it easy for them. Instead of having your 2-hour committee meeting where everyone goes down the club and sits around and they get carried away and talk about everything, tell people that if you join the committee, they're going to have a meeting every 2 weeks or every month. It's going to be on Zoom and it's going to be 20 minutes. So make the most of this different way of communicating and get more people involved and just be conscious. You're going to save them time by communicating like this. I personally am not going to, when we go back, I'm going to look at ways of saving time because I've enjoyed not driving here, there and everywhere for the sport. But if someone says to me, Paul, can you be on the committee this year? And we're really going to be efficient about the way we communicate, but we want your ideas. We think you've got a lot to offer. I'm going to say yes, because I know that this is a better way. We're all doing it way better. And I think you can get more people involved that way. Even the local president or secretary that did it for 10 years and is burnt out, they can't do it anymore. They love the club. Get them back in and show them that we need your help, we need your ideas, and we're just going to do video conferencing. So those are little ways. But Peter, I told you I get carried away, so have I spoken for too long?
No, it's all good. It's all good. We're bang on time, and there's been a lot of questions coming in. I might try and get Bridie on the screen. There's you and me at the moment. For Paul and Bridie, it's like a regular Skype call, but it is Bridie broadcast. So I'll get you on the screen too, Bridie. So all three of us are there now. I'll try to summarise because what's happened is on the online, there's been a conversation, a debate within the chats area among people as you've been talking, and great, which is kind of separate to this, which is fantastic. But I kind of trying to summarise some of the comments that I've seen coming in. They do like the practical advice around survival right now. Some of that practical stuff's really, really important, and I see there's a lot of things going on. But maybe as part of a summary, because we want to try to keep this to the half hour or so. Maybe as part of a summary, Bridie, you've heard Paul talking there. We've had a few questions pop up on the screen and things like that. What are one or two things? I put you on the spot question without notice. What are the two things that you think are going to be really important in terms of maintaining that connection to your local community for community sport as we come out of the restrictions, as we come out of COVID-19?
I'd say that if you're the provider, if you're the sporting club or the sporting organisation, if you can spend half a day with you and the people who you work with, your exec team or your other committee members, and have a bit of a brainstorm on what were we doing that was really effective, what was working incredibly well pre-coronavirus, what were people loving, the kids or parents or the feedback we were getting, what were the gaps, who were we never connecting with, who would we constantly say, we probably should run a program like this, but we've never had the time or the money or the inclination, etc. Exactly as Paul said, there is no money and we're all a bit pushed for time. So those two things become factors that you're not accounting for anymore. And if you can identify, you can start maintaining the stuff that's been working, but maybe start targeting the ways of delivering things or the groups of people that you've always wanted to and never been able to. Now is the time. And in the best spirits and interests of sport and recreation, where we're hoping to be better, I mean, that's what we do sport for too. We try to get better, we try and accomplish skills or be faster or be stronger or be more talented. Do that in your business as well. Ask yourself, what was I as the leader not doing as well as I could? How do I need to change things? Do we need to bring different committee members in? Be honest with yourself about how the organisation or the club was working, and be prepared to give frank and fearless feedback to others in a respectful way and to receive it. If someone says, hey, we want to try and run this program this way, but you were never open to suggestions about this, or you never wanted a girls' team here, or you always said that it was too much work to make sure that we had someone who was making things culturally appropriate for people who were Islamic, for example. Say that to that person. We love you, we want you involved, but we want you to try and change the way you do things. Are you open to that? This is something we talk about a lot with having hard conversations, is ask people the question. If no one's ever asked them and just told them, they're probably going to be defensive. So again, this is about communication and being open to making mistakes and failures, but with an aspiration that we're going to come out of this better and including more people.
Nice, perfect. And Paul, just to conclude, I did put up a little comment from a group who I know called Speak Up, Stay Chatty, around the mental health issue.
Yeah.
You mentioned that in particular, and it's certainly a concern of Play by the Rules around the mental health aspects in this. Would you kind of summarise some of your thoughts around that, just to conclude?
Yeah, well, it's been a real eye-opener for me, and I'll speak more generally rather than talking about details, because I know this video will go online. I don't want to embarrass anyone, but that age group of 11 and 12, I just see my boys and their friends just going flat out the whole time. But I have seen them, we've talked with our friends about them being a bit more insular and getting on their screens a bit more. And it did worry me, but they'd go down for a day and then they'd bounce back and be pretty full on for a day. And so, I'm not a psychologist, so I talk to my wife about it, and she's often better at these things than I am. So as parents, we just, I think, make sure that you're aware of the kids and understand that they're all different. Even within our house, there's 3 of them, and they're so different, all 3 of them, which means they can... it's 3 big challenges, not just one household. So, and ask for help. And I think connection with their friends is the big thing. I'm really looking forward to the next stage, perhaps, if all goes well, that they can ride around with their bikes. And that's the other thing is you don't have to put them on a running program or get them doing their structured stuff. If they can ride the bikes with their friends, that's exercise, and that's keeping them active, and look for ways that they can just have fun without even knowing that they're playing sport. Maybe they might open the monkey bars up again in the playgrounds, and it's a great way to do that. But yeah, I'm learning like everyone else. The only thing that I would say is pay attention and be really careful, and keep loving your kids, and keep an eye out for other kids. One of my son's best mates at school, his dad died this year, and I think the school has been really good of looking after him and making sure that he's got friends around him that he can look to, because sometimes the kids don't want to talk to adults. So make sure that they've got those different ways of connecting as well. We talk about connecting, but really it's just people to talk to and have fun with, and try and release the pressure that we can all get under in these times. So Yeah, it's tricky, but it's good fun. That's why we love being involved in our kids' lives.
Nice way to try and to conclude there, Paul. Thank you very much indeed. Like I said, there's been a massive comments, which is great. We will be some of the questions I've had is we will be recording. Yes, we will have recorded this, and we'll add that to Play by the Rules shortly. I'll just say final thank you to Bridie and Paul. You both, is quite weird because you're both either side of me of the screen, which is quite amusing for me. So yes, thank you very much for your participation today, and yes, thank you, and we'll have a recording up very soon.
Thanks, great work, mate. Keep up the good stuff, everyone.
Okay. Yeah, keep it up.
To conclude then, thank you again, once again, everybody, for your participation. Hopefully it's not too long. We're trying to learn of how to develop this. We're learning as we go along. The recording will be available on Play by the Rules. Let's just see if I can be really fancy and bring that up to show you where it is. Yes, I can. Look at that. So it will be on Play by the Rules. If you go to Play by the Rules, it's on the post-COVID-19 Community Sports Forums tab here, which we are building right now. So it is happening there. Let me get rid of that. And you'll see that in the next week or so on there with the other resources as well. So thanks once again, everybody, for your participation and your comments. Please stay safe and take care, and we'll see you in future forums.
Thank you.